Hi, everybody. I'm Gina Grillo, president of the Advertising Club of New York, and I'd like to welcome you to our conversation. And I'd also like to thank our partners, Asians in Advertising, and our member company, Nielsen, for this beautiful space. We also welcome all of you on in the virtual world. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. I just want to thank our partners, Jessica Lan and Sina Bias Kalan, for working with us to develop this content. I also like to thank our chairman of our board, Rick Song, who is SVP of Digital Sales here at Nielsen. And again, the space is perfect. We'll be back, we promise. This event is really about providing us all the opportunity to get together to talk about important topics of the day and bring all the different perspectives of our community. And in this episode, we honor AAPI Heritage Month, which we are all one and standing together, elevating Asian leaders and hear from those who are leading the charge. We hope that you all share your journeys, your perspectives, and what we hope to do is to discuss what we can all do in the workplace to drive change and impact both in our workplaces and in society. Before we get started, I want to encourage all of you who are not members, but I'm sure everybody in this room is a member, to really think about membership, because it's a way of uniting the community and really getting involved by attending things like this, but also doing great work, sitting on panels. There's a whole host of things that are upcoming. And so we would love for all of you to go to our website, check it out. We have another conversation with one of our partners on May 19th. And that's all about verticals in the retail industry. We have Unilever and VML Y&R joining us. And then on June 7th, we're going to honor Advertising People of the Year, a marketer, a rising star, a New Yorker, a legend, and a young pro. So please mark your calendars. It's my pleasure to turn it over to the panel and hear what they have to say. Sina, over to you.
Thank you, Gina. Okay, I'm so excited to talk to these amazing Asian leaders in the industry during the Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So please welcome our panelists. We have Soyoung Kang, Chief Marketing Officer at EOS Products. We have Natalie Gatmunton, Senior Analyst Marketing at American Express. We have Rick Song, Board Chair of the Advertising Club of New York and Senior Vice President of Group Head Digital Sales at Nielsen. And then we have virtually joining Nikki Lamba, Global Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at DDB Worldwide. Thank you. So let's kick off this panel to hear about your leadership journey. Can you share how your experience as an Asian impacted your journey, and if there was anyone or anything that has elevated you during your leadership journey? So Young, let's start with you.
Me first, okay. So I think that I like to go back to the beginning because I think that all of us are sort of like the sum total of all of our experiences in our lives, and a lot of that starts very early on. For me, one of the most formative things that really has shaped who I am today as a professional and as a marketer is my immigrant upbringing, actually. So my family immigrated here when I was 2. And I actually, even though I moved to America when I was 2, I didn't join an English speaking community until I was 5 when I went to kindergarten for the first time. So the first 5 years of my life, I actually didn't speak any English. And it's a really interesting thing to take a kid who, you know, is like a bright kid and drop them into a situation where they don't know the culture, they don't know the norms, and they don't know the language. And for me, it's really shaped who I am, because my reaction to that was I had this like voracious hunger to like observe, understand, and really decode and really understand human behavior. And I think that's so much what we do as marketers. We think so, we look at what's happening in the world, we look at what's happening in culture, we look at what's happening with our consumers and communities, and we decode and we try to understand emotions and psychology. And a lot of that really I attribute to my immigrant upbringing. So you know, I'm immensely proud of where I came from. And so much of the things that I thought were challenging back then have shaped who I am as a professional, as a marketer today.
That's amazing. Natalie?
Yeah. I think as somebody who's earlier in my career in comparison to my more tenured panelists is that I'm always thinking about how to position myself and where I want to go in the future. And I think when I think about how is being Asian impacted that, I kind of grew up in the cusp between the older generation and the need to assimilate versus like the younger, where there is more general societal acceptance for Asian culture, as well as more globalization, et cetera. I think that there is both a unique set of challenges and strengths from that. I would say the challenges is that I've always felt the need to be a little bit better, a little bit stand out a little bit more, and differentiate myself from my peers who were non-Asian or not a person of color. And so I think that has always encouraged me to be more introspective. And that kind of leads into my strengths, is that because I've been more thoughtful and definitely more obsessive about my development in my career journey, I think it's interesting because it's kind of forced me again to think about who I am as a leader, what is my natural leadership style, instead of trying to be somebody else that I wasn't, or trying to be a little bit more loud or a little bit less quiet. And so it really has brought me to a really good place where I've forced myself out of my comfort zone and thought about how I can get involved. And so whether it's like with other industry groups, or whether it's like co-founding my own mentorship program, I really have found value in reaching out to others. And that's something that has come a strength out of being Asian American and thinking more critically about where my career is taking me.
Sure. Thank you for saying elevated. That's probably the kindest way I've been called old and all. No, just kidding. It is very kind. I was born and raised in New York City, and what's interesting is that I think I've always been more of a right-brain person, and living in a melting pot like New York City, I actually think early on I didn't feel different per se, like culturally, until I got into advertising. So my first job in sales in the early 90s-ish, I was the only Asian American male. I think there might have been a handful of, less than a handful of women. But so, you know, to Natalie's point, I felt in being a trainee, learning the trades and learning the ad industry, I didn't actually encounter a lot of Asians on the commercial side. You know, plenty in the media planning function, at the agencies and things like that. But so I did feel there was there was an expectation of performance, about a higher performance, probably self brought on by myself. But I always thought that I had to be elevated above my peers, you know, to kind of grow my career, and you know, I think that's the impact it's had. I don't think it's been a negative one per se, because it's kind of pushed me. But I think that you know, as the industry becomes more diverse, it's even as the industry becomes, I think it's still an expectation for people in color in general. But I think it's evolving. I don't think she heard you.
Nikki, would you like to go?
Okay, so so much of what's been shared, you know, I think really resonates in terms of the immigrant story with me as well. And you know, I moved to the States in elementary school, and while I spoke, you know, English and had that sort of advantage in a way, I also moved to the States at a time when, you know, India wasn't sort of on the map in the way that it is today. So I almost always found myself having to represent the community and the diaspora in situations, whether it was school or, you know, early in the workforce, where there was just very little awareness about, you know, the diaspora, the community beyond stereotypes. It's interesting because coming up in the DEI space, which, you know, now it has a formal name, it has formal job titles associated with it, that didn't exist when I started doing research and consulting in the area. It was really more around gender and, you know, advancing women specifically into leadership roles. And spent a number of years with leaders across industries, helping them understand the research and really think about policies and programming to create more equity in their companies. And it was very rare to come across not only a female leader, but a female Asian leader. And I see that changing slowly, but at that time it was certainly very rare. So for me, when I think back to my career, I think I've just been really lucky, and I've had a number of people, mentors, sponsors, people at work, people that I'm generally connected to who have taken a chance on me. And most of them aren't people that look like me or come from the same background as me. They're just people that really took a chance, saw something in my ability to contribute, and gave me an opportunity where I was then able to do a good job, demonstrate success, and use that to get further along in my career. So that's had a snowball effect. And I think there's really so much power in, paying it forward that way.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. So I just have some stats, and Asian Americans face many barriers to leadership positions and are least likely group to be promoted from individual contributor roles into management. Today's event is titled Elevating Asian Leaders, and it's important for us to drive workplace and societal impact by developing and elevating all Asian and Pacific Islander leaders and empowering them to break the barriers for new generations. And the model minority myth hurts Asian Americans being stereotyped as wealthy, hardworking, and successful, and hides the economic realities of many Asian Americans. And the income inequality in the US is rising most rapidly among Asians. And there are large disparities within the group. The model minority myth also paints Asians as a monolith when Asian Americans trace their roots to more than 50 ethnic backgrounds. And then there's bamboozling, the ceiling that Asian Americans face in the workplace, where racial and ethnic inequalities prevent upward mobility. So according to researchers, Asians make up to 15 to 25% of elite MBA programs, but then there are only 7% of leaderships in the Fortune 100 and only 3% of CEOs in the Fortune 500. So before we talk about how emerging Asian leaders can do to elevate themselves, let's discuss a little bit more about how organizations and corporations can do to elevate Asian leaders. Because it can feel really impossible to move ahead in your career if people categorically overlook your community as leaders, right? Rick, as an Asian leader who held multiple high-level positions, leadership positions across top companies like Forbes, Yahoo, Microsoft, and now at Nielsen, and you've been with the Advertising Club of New York over a decade, what are some things companies and organizations are doing that you see working when it comes to elevating Asian leaders? And if you have any suggestions for companies and organizations?
Yeah, well, I think one of the most positive things that's come out of the last couple of years is, well, actually, and I'll preface that with some fairly bad moments even before that, is the awareness for what DE&I, actually now DE&I, known as diversity and inclusion before, but DE&I with the equity component, is that I think it's no longer this nice to have kind of sidebar topic. It's much more of a business imperative. And so at Nielsen, for example, we have BRGs, business resource groups, versus ERGs, right? Because it truly is a business imperative. In fact, 14 different diverse groups are represented. So, our CEO, David Kenny, has made a concerted effort to have a executive team, which represents 50% diversity in both gender and ethnic diversity. So, it starts with the leadership, of the company to dictate that culture. As a company, we're putting our money where our mouth is, right? Because we're publishing reports on Asian spending power. We actually have a product line called Nielsen Agreso Inclusion Analytics, which actually studies representation in broadcast, cable, an SVOD, so we can actually help companies dictate representation in their content investments. So it starts with the leadership, and actually putting into action things that will change the dynamics of the culture. And then it's an added bonus if you can actually produce products, solutions that can help change the scope of representation in the marketplace as well.
That's
Why are you so
amazing.
good at sales? I feel like really sold all these great products and
Why do you
services.
say that? 'Cause- no.
Thank you, Rick. No, that sounds really great. Like, making your ERG, not ERG, but BRG. I really like that. So now I want to turn to you, Soyan, and ask you more about your experience as a C-suite leader. Because a lot of us deal with imposter syndrome, and it can be hard for us, especially women. And inside these boardrooms, right? Inside these meeting rooms, a lot of times are more likely than filled with men who are not likely from underrepresented groups. And it could be daunting to even speak out, especially when you first make it from more junior to senior level role. It's almost like you're facing glass ceiling and bamboo ceiling at the same time as an Asian woman, trying to get to the leadership position. So I'm wondering, I would love to know what was going on in your mind, and what's one thing that really helped you become a successful C-suite leader today.
So, I struggle with having a really great answer to that question. And I say that because I think there have been, so if I go back to how organizations support talent, and I think specifically about the talent, like the gap in Asian representation at the more senior levels, I think that, and I think about what is the stereotypical leader. And so therefore, what types of profiles tend to make it into the C-suite and into board roles. I can kind of understand how it happens that, a group that, frankly, by the numbers is overrepresented versus census at the more junior levels and at the entry levels really starts to drop off quite significantly the more senior you get in the organization. And I think that there is still very much a perception around like what it means to be a leader, and how you behave and how you show up. And where I struggle, to be totally honest, is that being totally candid, I've had to play that game too. I've had to figure out when I have to fit in and when I can stick out. And so it's not like the answer that I wish I could give, because the ideal answer would be that from every moment in my career, even at the most junior levels, I've had the courage to speak up, stand up, stick up for myself, be myself, instead of sort of sometimes playing a role. But I haven't. And I think throughout my career, I've had to figure out when I needed to kind of show up and have the really strong voice and the presence and behave in a certain way and learn how to kind of coach myself into the model of a leader. And as I get more senior in my career, I think I have given myself permission to like leverage some of my voice now that I'm in more of a position of seniority. But I think that what I'm really like heartened to see is that I think that the world is changing. And when I look at people who are earlier in their career today, I have to say, I'm like blown away by the courage, the strength, the values that I see in earlier generations of people, people entering the workforce, in the workforce. And it just gives me a lot of hope for the ability to kind of be yourself more and be a professional leader and be a member of the C-suite without necessarily having to sacrifice or make compromises throughout your career. And I'm really grateful for my career and the journey that I've been on, but I think that I would be lying if I didn't say that it's definitely had its moments and its challenges throughout. And there have been times when I have not necessarily been myself through that process. And so I think that I tend not, this is a long-winded answer, apologies for that, but it's a very like soul-searching answer, because as I think about what you're asking, it's really like reflecting back on the choices that I've made through my career. And not wanting to judge anyone for the choices they make in order to have career progress and get elevated and eventually get to a position where they actually have that leverage and authority to be able to kind of like be more free to be themselves. And so I think that the only, you know, piece of advice that I would have is for individuals to figure out for yourself when you feel comfortable blending in, when you feel comfortable sticking out. And that's a choice that every individual makes. And I can't judge anyone for making their individual choices for their career.
But I would argue that subconsciously, whether you're probably not giving yourself enough credit, just because I think in general, and I agree it's changing now,
Yeah.
but in the era that we grew up in, I'm a little older than you, so I've dealt with it more. The whole notion of microaggressions, right, which any person of color has dealt with in our demo, right, for their lifetime, and that not everyone has to deal with that in attaining a senior role or being seen as a leader. You know, you kind of have to figure out how to respond to it. Often we don't, right? Because to your point, you turn it on, you turn it off, you have to respond accordingly. And you also want to present yourself as a leader.
Yeah.
So how do you handle the situation? So you know what I mean? So, and that's not all our counterparts have to deal with that, right? So that's, and it still exists today. I think you're right though, the next generation, far more informed, far more savvy than I, was ever at that point. But I totally agree with what you said.
Yeah, Rick, no, I totally agree with you. I don't think, Soyoung, you're giving yourself enough credit, because I know you've been a really great advocate for diversity and inclusion in our community. And I follow you through all your journeys, and you really give us, a lot of inspiration. So talking about the younger emerging leaders, Natalie, as an emerging Asian leader, what are some barriers you see in your journey to more senior positions, and how do you break and navigate those barriers?
Yeah, I think that's it's a tough question as well. I'm still digesting your answers, Young, and it really resonated with me. I agree. It's kind of this wanting to be a certain type of way because that's what you see in great leaders, but also trying to be yourself. And I think anybody, Asian or not, struggles with that. And it's a very existential question that we're all asking ourselves. I think in terms of barriers, there are the internal ones, of course, of like, as I'm earlier in my career, I'm trying to find my voice and trying to find my leadership style and et cetera. But I think the external ones, I think, are a little bit more, I don't want to say nefarious, but difficult to navigate, just because there's things that are out of my control. We can do some sort of bottoms up, like collectivizing and making sure that we're acknowledging these issues. But I think it really, the barrier is coming from the top down. It's like, I don't see a lot of Asian female CMOs, except for you, around me. I don't see a lot of leadership that has the same experience or that, likes to eat the same food as I do. And so I think those are my harder barriers, but my softer ones are definitely like what everybody who's earlier in their career experiences is, just finding my voice and finding companies that align with my values, et cetera. And so it's both internal and external for sure.
I love that. No, and I think when I talk to you and when I see how you're, navigating your career, I can totally see the more of bravery and more, outgoing, outspokenness. And so I really appreciate that answer. So Nikki, as a global leader who's led diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts for over 10 years, what are some of the actionable steps emerging Asian leaders can take to activate allies and sponsors within the company?
Yeah, one of the things that I like to say for anybody that cares to listen is to make DEI everybody's business, right? I know I'm the person with the DEI in my title, but that doesn't mean that I'm the only one that needs to be out there championing it. And if that's a motto or that's a philosophy, then surely, it's going to be a very long journey. So I would actually, encourage anyone that's an emerging leader, Asian or otherwise, to really get involved in whatever DEI efforts look like in their company, whether it's an employee resource group, whether it's an advisory council, a BRG, whatever it might be. And if it doesn't exist, go start it. Create a space for people to come together to really talk about the issues that are meaningful to them, and use that platform to give voice to the community and to educate people on the nuances of the experiences of Asian Americans. I mean, if you look at the data, we're again talking about a monolith in terms of the different countries we all come from and the languages and that sort of cultural experiences we have. But even broadly speaking, when you look at the research around the experience of Asian men versus Asian women and their path to leadership, there's very distinct challenges that each of those groups just face alone based on gender. So, use those platforms to really educate people and to create space for understanding. The second thing that I'd say is for an emerging leader, make sure that your work, the effort that you're putting in, the output is getting visibility to the influential individuals in your company and that you're getting credit for your work. And I say this because, I think we all know it internally that that's the right thing to do, but many of us are sort of raised, and I'll count myself as one of them, to be a bit more humble about our accomplishments, to kind of, let others brag about us and not to brag about ourselves. And to the extent that that is there as a part of your understanding of how to operate, I think, thinking about how to break out of that a little bit will serve every leader well, especially Asian leaders, and get you visibility so that you're tapped on for key assignments, for projects, for initiatives, client work that is going to help elevate your profile. Rick, you mentioned microaggressions, and that's such a relevant topic, and it's interesting. People think it's behind us, but I would argue it's not, because you've taken a workforce that has managed to maybe evade some microaggressions by being completely virtual, to now bringing them back into an office where they might be again re-entering a space where they have to potentially experience these at whatever cadence they do. And so I would encourage and empower every leader, Asian leaders especially, to disrupt microaggressions and to spend some time reading up on the best way to do that and find your voice, and stepping away from this feeling that many of us get to act like we didn't hear it, act like we didn't see it, but actually really acknowledge it and to step away from excuses and to do it in a tactful way. But I think being able to do that will garner a lot of respect and visibility, because there's so few people that are willing to do that. I think that it's the right thing to do, and those are things that do get noticed in this environment. And the last thing that I'll say is, use data. I'm a big proponent of data when it comes to DE&I, because it is such a esoteric and sort of emotional space. And the more that you can use data to demonstrate, not only representation, but experiences of different communities in the workplace, I think the better you'll be able to capture the attention and buy-in of people that, maybe need a little bit more swaying. And on that note, I'd also say just get into the details on the data and really disaggregate it, because if I've learned anything over the years in looking at company data across industries, I mean, most people want to aggregate data because it presents in many cases a better picture of representation across the workforce. But if you break that down and you look at it by level, you look at it by functional area or department, you're going to start seeing some trends. And they could be things that you want to see or things that you need to work on. But bringing that to a decision-making table, I think, could really help bust some myths that might be in place about where Asians are in your company, what they're doing, and the contributions they're making.
Amazing. Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, and I really love that you said, take credit for your work. We don't do that a lot. I don't do that. So I'll take that tip. So before we dive into Q&A, I want to quickly touch on how we can continue this conversation beyond the Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, because the representation matters, and that we want to drive workplace and societal changes beyond this month. And especially with all the violence against our community still continuing, still happening, right? What we do matters more than ever. So what can organizations, leaders, marketers, and advertisers do to continue the conversation beyond when it's appropriate and beyond this month? Natalie, you want to go?
Sure. I think when you think about tangible things that companies can do, it's very difficult to ask besides publishing these reports and everything. And I think the most important they can do is acknowledge and kind of take responsibility for the lack of diversity, and especially in upper management. I think at like, you know, as we all mentioned many times, like at the entry and mid-level, you see it, but not at the upper level. And I think it's just, I think for me, about having companies really acknowledge that, and then, you know, having our customers and having consumers really take action against those who are falling short, and holding them accountable. And, you know, like, your dollar is your vote. You can choose what companies you support and what you don't. And I think that's very important to be mindful, as we're no longer expecting a good product. We're expecting, you know, a moral product. We're expecting a sustainable product. We're expecting a product that came from companies who have very diverse leadership, et cetera. And so it's the choices that consumers make, I think, that will impact, of course, the senior leadership. But if you don't want customers to do that, then I think you'll have to act quickly.
I love it. Yeah, we have powers, right, as consumers. So Young, do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are other ways. I think as a marketer, I think a lot about representation and storytelling, and how marketers wield so much power to be able to tell more inclusive and diverse stories, and that involve more diverse people. And I feel like that's something that we should all be thinking about. You know, Rick gave an example of how, like, it's not just about the organization, but it's actually the work, the product and the services that you have at Nielsen that really supports moving to a better place with respect to DE&I. And I think that if we all think about what power we wield in the day-to-day work that we do, because honestly, it isn't just about doing good things, it's good for business.
Yeah.
So if we can all figure out how we harness that in order to help grow our businesses and hopefully do good in our industry, I think that's all part of the solution. Every day, it's all in the day-to-day work.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, we're in the advertising business, right? So we're part of creating the culture, how our culture is represented in this country, right? So I think marketers and advertisers have a big, creative shops have a big role and responsibility in ensuring that diverse voices are heard and those stories are told. And I think it's changing. You know, I think you're seeing it. You're seeing it happen in Asian Americans behind the camera, in being in starring role and lead feature films and things like that. And so we have to continue it. And I'll share one anecdote that is so recent, though. With every step forward, we take a step back, right? So there's a movie that I watched on a plane in San Francisco 2 weeks ago. Paul Thomas Anderson, you guys know the director, Magnolia. He's done some great films. Did a movie called Licorice Pizza. Anybody see that? There's 2 scenes in the movie that I had to turn off because, and it's basically a love story, but there's a scene about, it might be a actual character. So where a white restaurant owner, his Japanese wife have a Japanese restaurant, and they're consulting someone about their advertising, and she responds in Japanese, and he actually responds in a fake Asian accent. Anybody else see this movie? Anyone remember the scene? It's so offensive. I saw it twice, and this was nominated for Academy Award. So, the work that the industry creates helps shape, right, the culture, helps shape the messaging of how voices are heard. So like, as much as we go forward, there's and nobody's stood up in the community that I could see. There were Asian groups that stood against them, and nobody within the entertainment industry stood up and said this is not acceptable. Even Asian actors, right? So even the Asian acting community. So it's important. The role that advertising plays in helping shaping culture is just as important as entertainment. Anyone else that kind of creates media and content that shapes what our culture looks like.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. And I totally agree with you, because I mean, when Shang-Chi came out, I was just beyond happy, right? Like, that movie is incredible. So that you're right, and it's really important. Yeah.
In Eternals, I forgot the gentleman's name. The first South Asian, and then Simu Liu in Shang-Chi was our first.
And that was very emotional for me and a lot of
Yeah.
our community. Nikki.
I think there's a lot to be said about just really continuing to overcoming stereotypes through education. And I think we all recognize that, Asian American sort of conversations, intersectionality, all of the above doesn't start and end in the month of May, right? We need to be having these conversations throughout the year, connecting it to the work, whatever it might be for us, connecting it to our clients, and really continuing to lean in towards disrupting some of these notions and stereotypes that exist. I think that's ultimately what it's going to take for people to have a better understanding, for that to flow into their work and to impact what we're seeing in terms of the content that's created. When I think about mentorship and sponsorship, which I talked about a bit earlier, I mean, I would encourage every leader, especially Asian leaders, to to identify people and to think about very intentional leadership development. And it doesn't have to be somebody from your specific community. Look down and find people that you can talk to, because the more that we are out there paying it forward, the more that you are establishing your presence as a leader, more that you're being a role model for somebody that may not have ever even had a conversation with somebody from a different background or a different industry even than them. And so I think those are things that, we should be doing to pay it forward in terms of just making sure that we're constantly out there talking to people, and not just talking to educate, but talking to help and to listen and learn, and really creating space for dialogue. And I'd add, we spoke a little bit about DEI communities, but I think we need to just keep on finding ways, both internally at work and externally, to really have community where we are giving voice to people, right? And using the power of like a collective voice to talk about whatever is happening, what the experiences are, whether it is about something that is current and unfortunate, like we're seeing around, the rise in Asian hate, or it's something, connected to the work or creativity or whatever industry you might be, or facet of advertising you might be in, and shedding light on that. I see some of these things happening. There's a lot of progress that I think has been made, and certainly at Omnicom, there's the Asian American, ERG that's been putting together just really phenomenal activations and conversations and responding in real time. But I'd love to see all companies really making space for that, and not just sort of the Asian Americans talking to other Asian Americans, but seeing that allyship, and for it to be equally attended by people that don't identify but are there to support and to learn and to participate.
Thank you, Nikki. And I 100% agree, because there are so few of us make it to the leadership role, right? It's so important to pay it forward and use your voice to open doors for others. And not just, for our community, just all the communities underrepresented. And thank you so much for your insights, and thank you for using your time, resource, and wisdom with us today. So now we'll go to Q&A. We have one question already. So what general advice do you have for young professionals on how to bring ideas to management in the virtual environment we work in today, when they have never been seen in person? Who want to take it?
I mean, I can try. I have an answer also just in terms of elevating career in general, but I think, and I think all the panelists mentioned that kind of ingrained in the culture is not necessarily built in to speak up at all, right? And I know historically that I even remember conversations with my mom when I was younger, like, oh, should you be saying that? Should you? I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna say that, but I think, virtual or not, right? So I think if you're thinking about a career in leadership, you're thinking about getting your ideas heard, you have to speak up, number one. You have to make sure your voices are heard, and you're going to have to train yourself, whatever exercises, whatever role playing you have to do to rehearse. This is part of your job as becoming a leader, is speaking in public, is speaking to your peers, is speaking to folks that are far more senior than you. So learn that discipline in terms of how to speak up. Be seen, right? So there are more organizations across any industry than ever before, than ever I remember growing up. Get out there and network and build your brand, right? There's so many different ways you can do it. Join the ad club. We'd love to have you. And then finally take action, be a doer, right? There's so many talkers, there's so many things that, and there was a great, Bill Amata, our friend Bill Amata I was on a panel with him earlier in the week, and he said something, last week, and he said something about, we need to move from storytelling to story doing, which I think is a great t-shirt we should get made, maybe Gina. But I think, you know, the third part, taking action, is like, okay, once you're speaking up, you're being seen, then take action. Join that committee, you know, nominate yourself for a board seat, nominate yourself to be part of that group, whatever it is, right? Be engaged, don't sit back. And I think those three things you'll build a discipline and a muscle around it, and it'll help you become the leader you want to be.
I can build on that a little bit as well, you know, in terms of just getting visibility in a virtual environment from senior leaders. Listen, one of the things that I've seen, you know, in the time that I've been at DDB, certainly, but even before then, and I've done this myself early in my career, is send an email to that senior leader or small group of senior leaders who you're trying to pitch an idea to or get some attention from, and share your idea. More often than not, they'll probably welcome it. They'll be excited by it. And, you know, just take that chance. And you know, if you do happen to get into a stage where you are able to request a meeting with them, you know, send the agenda in advance, send some materials in advance, and use that meeting time to discuss what they've already seen. So they already attach your name to whatever idea or, you know, proposal you put in front of them. And I can assure you that, you know, in more cases than not, you'll be met with some positive receptivity on the other end. And you never know where things like that lead, but you've got to put yourself out there, which I know is a little scary, but get yourself out there, get your idea out there, share the work in advance. And that's how you get credit for your work also.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Rick. No, that's really helpful. So I'm really interested about this question we just got, because in agents and advertising, we get this question a lot from people. We just had a Breaking Barriers, our first annual summit last Thursday and Friday, and we had a session actually about this. So the question goes, for those of you who are not diversity, equity, and inclusion managers specifically, how do you feel about shouldering the need to act as a diversity, equity, and inclusion advocates in your companies when you have so much to do in your own job?
Start on that one. So I think for me, especially being at a leadership level, I feel like it is imperative for me to be able to just give as much as I possibly can of my time to basically try to get our organization and hopefully the industry more broadly to a better place today than it was when I was growing up. So I really feel like it's my duty. I totally understand if other people don't, but I actually love that aspect of what it means to be a leader, thinking about people, thinking about talent, thinking about organizations. And DE&I is such an integral part of that in today's world. And so I think of it as really pretty fundamental as a leader, because if I'm trying to create the most high potential talent organization, then frankly, it is a core part of my job to ensure that we have an equitable workplace. And I'm curious, actually, Natalie, what you would say, for being at a very different scaled organization at a different stage of your career.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'm sighing a little bit. I think that this is something in general that I ask myself, and that I've actually learned over the past few years of talking to, people that I admire and people that I respect and people who mentor me, is that I'm always like, how do you choose what to do and what to not to do? And I've always been my whole life, and even up till to this day, I'm always wanting to do more. I want to do everything. I want to do anything. I want to help out however I can. I want to take more of my job. I want to do more, whatever. And so I got this really good advice where it was, somebody said to me is, only do things that bring you energy. And so if being an advocate in this space brings you energy, then I say go for it. Do it in the most structured way possible, do it in the most casual way possible, weave it into every day, etc. But if it doesn't, then find something else that does. This doesn't have to be your battle, just be you and continue on in the way that is most natural to you. I don't think that everybody needs to be some sort of DE&I champion. I think that's really great, but it's not for everybody, and it certainly should not be asked for everybody. And so again, like, just find something that you enjoy and that brings you energy.
Yeah, no, I love that question because some people are just not, outspoken and they don't want to be involved and they don't want to be leading, the company's DEI initiatives, for everyone. In the audience, do you have any questions for the panelists? Yes. We'll get you a mic. Thank you.
So I missed the first few minutes, so if this is repetitive, I apologize. But just being members of the AAPI community and advertising, how did you introduce that idea to your families? And just, it's such an unconventional way to go down your career. And when I told my friends and my family about what I'm doing, they were so confused. They had no idea what the heck I was doing. And honestly, still to this day, they don't know what I'm doing.
It's actually kind of funny because so Rick and I are a part of this, this organization. It's called 108 Asian Marketers and More, right? That's the 108A. I think, yeah, I'm like trying to remember it. Apparently the branding is just a little more.
CMOs haven't the title yet. It's not super.
Sure, we'll ruin it. But we have these breakout groups and like these small kind of like gatherings. And I just had one this week. It was like the kickoff small group virtual meeting. And we got like discussion topics in advance. They're like conversation starters. And this one, the funny one was, what does your family think you do? And how did you explain it to them? So this is like a very common theme, like that none of our families know what we do. To the point where my last job actually before EOS was at Bath and Body Works. And I remember the day after like working there for 6 years and my mom was like, can you buy me an oscillating fan? And I was like, no, I work at Bath and Body Works, not Bed Bath and Beyond. So I just like, so, I think that the way I explain it, and I think this is my like aspirational kind of view of what it means to be a marketer in general, is that I'm a business person. I help grow the business. My functional area may have boundaries within, like how I contribute to the business growth, but I'm a business person and that's how I explain it to most people within my family.
No, I love that because my parents are here, my biggest supporters, but they didn't understand what I do for, I don't know how long. So I feel you. Any other question? Yeah.
Thank you. This is a great panel. So my question is, so there's so many ERGs and BRGs that are popping up across the industry and other industries, which is fantastic. But the big question is, how can we do more together, right? Across different groups, across different industries, across different organizations, because real change comes when there's a thrust, right? When there is consensus that we want to see more of this and less of this stuff that you saw in that film, right, Rick? So how do we come together to do more to drive change in a way that's more meaningful in a time frame that's going to be more consistent to what we want to see for the folks that are coming up behind us?
It's a huge question coming from my friend Donovan. Thank you, Donovan. I mean, I think that the whole notion of allyship is actually relatively new. It came out of like the recent events of the past few years. And I think it's one of the best things that came out of some very tough moments in our recent past. So I think the paths have to be concurrent, right? Because we're far from what needs to be done for each, if anything, our diversity is growing, right? So we have different groups that should be recognized. So our demand for inclusion is growing. But there's no doubt that, the allyship between the groups, right? Because ultimately, the whole notion of DE&I, right? The goal is there is no DE&I at some point, right? It's probably a far off goal aspiration. But right, if we're all thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion all the time, and we're actually executing on that vision as a society, and we don't need it as a specialization. It's like mobile before, remember? Just kidding. But thank you for laughing, Kara. But you know, I think they have to be concurrent paths, right? Because there's each group, each diverse group has specific needs, nuances, and cultural differences, right? That should be recognized. That should be that should be included. But then for sure, you know, the allyship between groups, that's the only way that this ever moves forward. To your point, to your question, it's really like we all have to be moving forward together, you know, in unison. My 2 cents.
Yeah, no, thank you Donovan, for that question. And thank you, Rick. I totally agree. I would also would love to hear what Nikki would have to say about this question.
Yeah, thanks, Tina. I mean, I completely agree with what Rick is saying around allyship and coming together to amplify collectively, right? And I think you saw that. I mean, when you continue to have the Black Lives Matter movement, it wasn't just Black employee, Black employee, excuse me, ERGs or BRGs that were necessarily rallying for the social justice that, you know, we were talking about. It was a lot of ERGs banding together because it was a human issue. You know, you see that even with the Asian hate and the xenophobia and everything that we've unfortunately seen in the past couple of years, you know, examples of communities really coming together because it's about standing up for what's right for everyone at a baseline. So I think there is a power in doing that. I think sometimes it's challenging though, right? Because if you are brought together by one specific affinity, you know, there's a tendency to just kind of double down on that and maybe not intentionally, but not to think about inviting others to join in with you. And so for anybody here that's listening that is in a leadership role, and let's say your company's ERG or BRG, maybe take a minute at, you know, in your next meeting to think about how to loop in your colleagues from your other ERGs and BRGs to help come together and be a more united front towards whatever it is that you're hoping to accomplish in the year. And I can, you know, I can say confidently that you'll probably find several moments where you can bring people together, whether it's through a simple act of just opening up an invitation to that group and their membership base, or to bring in speakers from that community to help give a more intersectional perspective. You know, there's just so many ways of, I think, locking arms and just, you have to remind yourself to do that and that we're all in it together.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you. Okay, so we have one more question from those who tuned in today. What kind of help or call to action messages would you like to see from the audience here today?
So I'll kind of reiterate what I said earlier. Speak up, be seen, take action.
I would say just to, I think Nikki said something earlier around how, and related to Donovan's question, I think that that there are many different ways in which we can have mentor and mentee relationships, and they're not necessarily all within this community, and they don't all have to be within a community. And some of my best mentors who have shown me a path have been ones who aren't necessarily in my underrepresented group, but are in other underrepresented groups. And hopefully I've been able to serve in that role as well for other folks in my organization. So I think the ask is that this is a very diverse group of attendees here today. And I would ask everybody to find ways to be able to help the next generation, and then also look to you know, whoever it is that you aspire to be. I think you can look in other groups as well, and I think hopefully help create that type of allyship that that Donovan and Rick alluded to.
Yeah, I think to close it out, it's definitely about like finding people who advocate for you. Networking is a numbers game. Not everybody is going to align to your values or click personality wise, and I think it's like, you know, Asian people are stereotypically don't want to reach out for help, but it's reaching out for help from others, whether Asian or not, as well as expanding your reach, and just, again, a numbers game. I think it's all about finding your advocates.
I just want to build on something that So-Young said around, you know, paying it forward and being intentional about mentorship and sponsorship. To the audience, right? When you are going home today, or for those that might be dialing from home, when you have a few minutes, grab a pad and make a list. If you're in a position to mentor people, make a list of the people that you're already mentoring or sponsoring. Or if you are younger in your career or junior in your career, then of the people that might be playing that role for you. And once you made that list, have a look and see what's similar or dissimilar about those individuals, right? And think about that when you think about who else you can be bringing into the fold. Who else needs to know more about the amazing stuff you're doing? I mean, are all the people there from the same background? Are they all in the same functional area? Are they all working on the same client team? And try and break that a bit so that you're getting a broader set of people that either you're helping in terms of giving guidance and counsel to, or that you're getting visibility to, who are going to play that role and help you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. And I would say ask for help.
We have one more question.
Oh, great.
Anna, did you want to finish?
Oh my gosh, Pam. No, I would just say ask for help, because we, as a community, we don't do that enough. And asking for help is such a great way to find your mentor, sponsor, your ally. And you actually don't know how much people want to help. People usually want to help. So we'll get your question, Pam. Thank you for coming.
Thanks. Hi, hi, Sana. Hi, Nikki. We were just on a panel together, so I actually came to meet you in person. So it's nice to see you. So Pam Yang, hi, everyone. My question is, given all the work that's being discussed and done around diversity and inclusion efforts, it really comes down to the operations, right, of running a company. And there's a lot of tactical things that I don't think we get to talk about because these concepts are so big and these topics are so difficult. But I'm curious, given all the companies you've been in, all the panels you've been on, all the people you've connected with, what are some of the tactical things that you've seen in organizations that have really made, will hopefully make a sustainable difference in these places? Because oftentimes these programs are short-term, or they're a one-time investment, or sometimes they're a programming initiative rather than a sustainable business initiative. So I'm curious, Rick, you mentioned BRGs, Nikki, you talked about the data, but I'm curious, like, what else are you seeing deployed in organizations that you think will really make a long-term difference, whether they're initiatives or policies or programs?
To give my answer, because I work in a relatively lean organization. EOS isn't a very big company, and so we actually don't have the infrastructure or dedicated teams to support DE&I initiatives. A lot of the work that's being done is just like on a volunteer basis. People are just kind of like doing things that they think are the right things to do. And I don't know that that's necessarily right, but it's better than not doing anything. And I think my advice would be that, like, don't try to make it perfect. Try to make it better than it was yesterday. And every day, try to make tomorrow better than it was yesterday. And so, I like one thing that we rolled out was literally just like a supplier diversity survey done in an Excel sheet, right? Like, it's not sophisticated. There's no like deep analytics going on. It's just asking for the data became a tool that we use to help improve supplier diversity in a very sort of like low tech kind of way. But I think that if all of us just sort of like just tried to make progress versus getting things perfect, I actually think that we can make quite a lot of progress collectively as an industry.
Pam, I can, oh, sorry, I'll just jump in really quickly if we have a minute. Pam, I don't see you, but it's good to hear your voice again. I think when I look at and I think about a DEI sort of journey in a continuum, it starts at a compliance-oriented place for most companies. It kind of moves to an HR, DEI-led space, which is what you're referring to, where it's largely programmatic. And I think companies that have had the most success in having longevity behind their DEI programs and the most measurable change are ones that have an integrated approach, and one where it is a leader-led function. And it still includes a programming, but it is driven as a business imperative by business leaders. And the way to really do that is to have KPIs, which is something we're doing at DDB to really make sure that there's accountability at the leadership level for them to understand the role and responsibility they play in driving DEI forward for their respective area, both from a representation standpoint, I should say representation standpoint, obviously inclusion, representation alone isn't going to work. Creating that environment where those diverse voices can all work together, and then of course looking at equity so that the people that are moving up in the organization and kind of pipelining to go into more senior roles are representative of our population, our community, the areas where we live and work. So it really is about that accountability and having that shared accountability so that, if you have one person driving DEI and they're the only person accountable for it and they leave or something happens, that it doesn't all just fall flat, but there's a system that's already there up and running.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that. We have one more question, and I think you can answer that, Rick. What are some ways that you recommend getting involved with the Asian American Pacific Islander community in New York City outside of work? I just graduated college and would love to volunteer to help the community while I work in New York.
I think that there are some great ways. It is a little bit, I think, nerve-wracking to go out and to find people and make friends and make connections. But there are a lot of really great communities that function both in person and online. I think it just depends like the lens which you're looking at it. If you're looking with the advertising and marketing lens, there's of course Asians advertising. There's the program that I co-founded with the 3AF, which is the mentorship program. There's also a lot of really good ones that I personally would like to get more involved in. I'm not affiliated with them, but there's a Instagram that started at the beginning of the pandemic called Send Chinatown Some Love. And it was basically like nobody wanted to eat at Asian restaurants at the beginning of the pandemic because of all this hate and the fear and et cetera. And so I really like that Instagram because they just right now like focus on giving meals to the elderly Asian community and really focus on brightening that spot. And so when I say brightening, I mean, they actually put like lanterns up in Chinatown, downtown Manhattan. It was really beautiful and I love what they did. And so I think you have to just find like from which lens you're looking to get involved. If it's within professional, there's so many, and definitely like reach out to those of us on the panel. But if it's also like in other interests, they're existing online. And if not, if you don't see anything that you're interested in, definitely create your own space. There's so many people I think looking to get involved, whether that's your friends or new ones that you make along the way.
I love that. Thank you, Natalie. Yeah. Create your own if you don't find one you want to join. Thank you everybody so much for that insightful conversation. Thank you for Soyoung, Natalie, Rick, Nikki, for everything you do for the community and spending and sharing your time, resources and wisdom with us today. And thank you all joining. Back to you, Gina.
So yes, want to thank everybody for being here, but I want to just share something that came up in the chat. Sharon Pinello, we need more of these open, honest conversations of what AdLand is really like, especially for Asians as we level up. So the Ad Club is committed, Asians in Advertising is committed. I loved what you had to say about socializing the different groups, because you know what, as long as we all just operate in these silos, we can all, self-congratulate and work people through, but it's really through the allyship and the community, the whole community coming together that I think will take steps forward. This was a great conversation. I thank all of you. I thank Nielsen for hosting us. We're going to have refreshments and cocktails now, so please stay. Everybody online, thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time.